Raiskin paused at the edge of the lantern-lit road, the mist swirling around his boots. He turned to Lorelei and Tavern, his voice barely above the hush of the marsh. "Let me go ahead. Randall will speak more freely if he's not confronted by all of us. And if there's danger, you two can act as backup." Lorelei frowned, her hand tightening on the hilt of her blade. "You trust him that much? Or is there something you're not telling us?" Raiskin, her silver eyes searched his face, seeking the truth. Tavern looked away, shoulders tense, but finally nodded. "We'll wait by the old watchtower, just outside the academy gates. If you don't come back or signal within the hour, we come in. No arguments." With a final glance at his friends, Raiskin set off alone toward the looming silhouette of Blackstaff Academy, heart hammering. The black crystal pressed cold against his side, hidden beneath layers of cloak and illusion. Every step closer, the air seemed heavier, shadows lengthening along the path. Malachar's whisper brushed his mind. "You cannot keep secrets from what you are, little mage." The academy's gates stood open, torchlight flickering across stone and ivy. Raiskin steeled himself, feeling the weight of all that had happened. The lies, the losses, the power he now carried, and stepped inside to seek the Archmage's answers, alone. The corridors of Blackstaff Academy seemed emptier than Raiskin remembered, each footfall echoing as he wound his way toward Archmage Randall's private study. He paused before the heavy oak door, the black sigil of the academy gleaming faintly in the torchlight. Steeling himself, Raiskin rapped thrice, then entered at the Archmage's curt summons. Randall sat behind a desk cluttered with scrolls and crystal globes, his gaze sharp. "You come alone, Raiskin. That speaks to either courage or desperation. Sit." Raiskin obeyed, the black crystal a cold secret against his chest. "I know about the ritual in the East Wing," he began, voice taut, "and the crystal forged from its fallow. Why did you bind those memories? What did you hope to erase or protect?" The Archmage's face tightened, shadows deepening under his eyes. Malachar's pain bled into the academy, infecting students, warping the weave. "I tried to seal that wound, not erase it, but memory resists binding, sorrow endures. The crystal was to be a vessel, not a weapon. Tell me, Raiskin, have you brought it back, or does its shadow cling to you still?" Raiskin hesitated, feeling Malachar's whisper coil around his answer. "I have it, but I need your truth before I decide what to do with it. Are you willing to finish what you started, or have you become as blind as those you once opposed?" The room thickened with tension. The fate of the crystal, and perhaps the academy, balanced on choices yet made. Raiskin drew the black crystal from beneath his cloak, placing it carefully on the desk between him and Randall. Its surface shimmered with inner darkness, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. The Archmage regarded it warily, fingers drumming the wood, but made no move to touch it. "If you attempt to attune," Randall warned, "I will anchor your mind as best I can. But even I may not reach you if Malachar's sorrow takes hold." Raiskin nodded, settling into the meditative posture Nithal had taught him, drawing a deep breath. He reached out, letting his fingertips brush the crystal. Instantly, a tide of memory and grief surged up. Every loss, every shadow lingering at the edge of his life. Malachar's ancient loneliness threading through his thoughts. For a moment, Raiskin teetered on the brink of being swept away, his mind splitting between his own pain and the echoing void of Malachar's. A firm, grounding presence pressed through the tumult, Randall's magic, steady and resolute, attempting to tether Raiskin to the here and now. Through the storm of feeling, Raiskin saw flashes the ritual in the East Wing, Randall and Thalarin chanting, a circle of weeping students, the crystal forming from tears and shadow. The truth was unmistakable. This was not a prison for Malachar, but a crucible for memory itself, forged from the Academy's collective pain. With effort, Raiskin pulled back, gasping, the crystal humming quietly between them. He met Randall's gaze, voice raw. "You tried to heal us, but you only taught the pain to hide. This crystal doesn't bind Malachar. It binds us. What will you do if I give it to you now?" Raiskin kept his hand poised protectively over the black crystal, his voice edged with threat. "If you won't speak the full truth, I'll take this crystal far from Waterdeep. I'll find answers in the shadows you fear." The air in Rahandal's study seemed to thicken, the torches guttering as if the room itself recoiled from the ultimatum. The Archmage's eyes narrowed, but a wary resignation replaced his prideful mask. "Wait. If you walk away with it, you doom us both. I will show you what I hid, what the Academy tried to forget." He rose, collecting the crystal with great care, and beckoned Raiskin to follow. Together, they descended through winding staircases and forbidden corridors, the path lit only by flickering blue witchlights. Randall's voice was low, almost apologetic. The temple below the East Wing was sealed after the ritual failed. The thieves must have found their way inside. The crystal's song will guide us, but its power may awaken more than memory. As they reached a rusted iron door deep beneath the Academy, Raiskin felt the crystal pulse in his palm, its resonance growing, pulling him onward. Faint echoes of sorrowful chanting drifted from beyond the threshold. Randall pressed his sigil to the lock. The door groaned open, revealing a sunken chamber of forgotten statues, broken altars, and at its heart, a circle of masked thieves hunched around a ritual brazier. The crystal in Raiskin's hand began to sing, a haunting melody only he could hear, promising revelation or ruin. Randall's hand gripped Raiskin's shoulder. "We must act quickly. If the thieves finish their rite, the pain we bound will be unleashed." Raiskin's heartbeat thundered in his ears, the line between memory and magic blurring as the crystal's song grew louder, calling him toward his fate. Raiskin thrust his will into the crystal, channeling the shadow magic that coiled within him. Darkness spilled from his fingertips, racing along the cracked stone floor like living ink. The crystal's song crescendoed, a haunting, wordless hymn that only he could truly hear. Yet the thieves froze mid-chant, their masked faces turning as the shadows warped the flickering brazier's light. The ironwood rod in the silver, masked leader's hand glowed crimson, struggling to suppress the crystal's call. For a heartbeat, their magic clashed in the center of the chamber, shadow against sorrow, control against memory. The ritual wavered, runes sputtering. But the surge of power left Raiskin shaken, the darkness in him threatened to spill beyond his grasp. Tendrils of regret and rage swirling dangerously toward Randall at his side. The thieves regrouped, realizing Raiskin was the source of the disruption. The leader barked a guttural command, and two acolytes advanced, hurling shards of glassy obsidian that pulled at Raiskin's memories, each one a tiny anchor to old wounds. The crystal's song twisted, growing mournful, as if pleading with Raiskin not to lose himself in the very shadows he wielded. Randall's hand tightened on Raiskin's shoulder, his own magic flaring to shield them both. "Careful," the Archmage whispered urgently. "The crystal feeds on what you give it. If you're not anchored, if you let go, it will consume us all." Raiskin stood at the center of the sunken temple, torn between seizing control or risking everything to break the thieves' hold once and for all. Raiskin squeezed his eyes shut, clutching the black crystal as the mournful melody threatened to drown him. He forced himself to remember. His family's laughter, Miranel's shy smile, the promise in Loralia's silver ring, each memory a lifeline against the pull of sorrow. Randall's magic flowed into him, a steadying current, anchoring Raskin's mind to the present and weaving through the crystal's song like a golden thread. The obsidian shards hurled by the acolytes shattered against an invisible barrier, Randall's wards sparking blue fire. The masked thieves faltered, their chanting breaking as the crystal's resonance wavered. The silver-masked leader, voice strained, shouted a command in a guttural tongue. A shadowy tendrils snaked from the ironwood rod, seeking to reassert control, but the crystal song, no longer a weapon, became a shield. Raiskin's memories, painful yet precious, fused with its power, repelling the shadows. For a moment, the thieves' ritual collapsed, the brazier sputtering as the chamber plunged into uneasy silence. Raiskin felt the crystal's sorrow recede, replaced by a fragile clarity, but the leader's gaze fixed on Raiskin, eyes burning behind the mask. "You think you can hold it? The pain is endless. It will consume you, as it did the Watcher." The threat hung heavy in the air, and Raiskin sensed the thieves were preparing another, more desperate move. Randall leaned close, his voice urgent. "We have a narrow window. Do we press the advantage or seek to parley? The crystal is listening through you. Choose quickly before the shadows gather strength again." Raiskin and Randall locked gazes for a fleeting heartbeat, then acted as one. Randall swept his staff in an arc, conjuring a lattice of blue wards that cut across the sunken chamber, pinning several thieves in place. Raiskin, heart pounding with both fear and defiance, let the crystal's song rise within him, not as a weapon, but as a harmony to Randall's magic. Sorrow and hope intertwined, shadow and memory lancing outward to unravel the ritual's remaining anchors. The leader in the silver mask struck back, slamming the ironwood rod to the stones. Shadowy coils lashed toward Raiskin, but he met them with a surge of memory-laden light, scenes from his childhood. His mother's voice, the glint of Lorelai's ring, flared like stars against the darkness, each repelling the shadow's advance. The thieves staggered, some dropping to their knees as the spellwork binding them began to unravel, their faces contorted in pain and awe. A shudder ran through the temple as the brazier guttered, its flames snuffed by the surge of raw magic. The crystal in Raiskin's grasp vibrated violently, and for a moment he glimpsed Malachar's sorrowful eyes staring back at him from the black depths. Randall's shout rang out. "We have them!" Force their surrender, or the temple itself may collapse. The thieves hesitated, the leader wavering between throwing down his rod or unleashing one last desperate spell. Raiskin felt the crystal's power at a breaking point. The outcome hanging by a thread, the echoes of memory and shadow threatening to tear the chamber apart. Raiskin extended his hand, shadow magic crackling like black lightning from his fingertips as he focused every ounce of will on the ironwood rod. The masked leader recoiled, but the rod trembled in his grip, the red thread winding around it glowing as if in protest. The crystal in Raiskin's other hand keened, a sound only he could hear, resonating with the pain and longing within him. A shadow surged between Raiskin and the leader, a twisting helix of memory and darkness that bound them both in a contest of wills. For a moment, time seemed suspending, the masked thieves frozen in fear, Randall chanting a counter-charm at the chamber's edge. The ancient runes on the temple floor flaring with unstable energy. Raiskin felt the ironwood rod's agony, its history steeped in rituals and regret, echoing through his bones. The leader's eyes widened behind the mask, realizing the rod was slipping from his grasp, the shadows responding not to him, but to Raiskin's deeper sorrow. With a final surge, Raiskin tore the rod free. It shot across the chamber into his hand, the red thread unraveling as it touched his palm. The crystal's song shifted, no longer mournful, but wild and exultant, filling the air with a pulse that shook loose stones from the ceiling. The thieves faltered, some dropping to their knees, and the chamber itself groaned as if protesting the sudden shift in power. The masked leader, momentarily disarmed, staggered backward, voice hoarse with fear and anger. "You have no idea what you're doing. The temple will not hold. Release it, or we all fall." The black crystal and the ironwood throbbed in Raiskin's hands, the line between memory and shadow dangerously thin as the ancient magic of the temple began to spiral out of control. Raiskin braced himself in the trembling temple, clutching both the black crystal and the ironwood rod. The air crackled with a surge of conflicting magic, shadow and sorrow from the crystal, ritual order from the rod, a drawing on everything he had learned about memory, pain, and connection. Raiskin forced himself to recall not only his own life, but the stories of those lost to the temple's darkness. He let the memories flood through him, moments of joy, regret, hope, and love, each one a thread he wove into the unstable weave. The two artifacts responded in kind. The rod pulsed with a red-tinged glow, its oppressive weight countered by the crystal's song. Now swelling into a chorus of voices, the ancient runes embedded in the stone floor flared, and the groaning in the walls subsided for a heartbeat. Raiskin's vision blurred as he became a conduit, channeling the temple's history and the grief bound within its stones. For a moment, the chamber steadied, columns straightening, the ceiling's collapse halting mid-rumble, shadows pressed back by mingling light and dark. But the strain was immense. The rod and crystal threatened to tear him apart, their energies vying for dominance. Randall, sensing Raiskin's peril, stepped in beside him and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, lending his own anchoring magic to the wild, swirling forces. The masked thieves watched in awe and terror, some scrambling for the exits while others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the power on display. The masked leader shouted, "Release them both or you'll doom us all." But Raiskin knew that letting go now could mean disaster for everyone trapped within. A final surge of power coursed through the chamber. The choice was clear: channel the power into a healing ritual to calm the temple's wounds. Focus on subduing the thieves while risking collapse. Or reach out to the crystal's song and try to commune with whatever spirit lingered beneath the temple's sorrow. Raiskin pressed the rod and crystal together, feeling their wild energies buck and snarl within his grasp. He closed his eyes, searching for the fragile thread of healing woven through memory and pain. The crystal's song rose higher, filling the chamber with its mournful chorus, but beneath its sorrow he sensed the pulse of hope, long buried but not lost. Drawing on the lessons of Nithal and Professor Nevrin, Raiskin began to chant, not a spell of power, but of remembrance and release. As his voice echoed through the stone, the runes beneath his feet shimmered with a gentle blue light. The shadows clutching the walls recoiled, and the oppressive air thinned, replaced by the scent of old incense and rain. Randall lent his strength, shaping the magic into a lattice that wrapped the chamber in a cool embrace. The masked thieves shuddered as the healing magic washed over them, some weeping, some collapsing, all freed from the shadow's binding. Even the masked leader seemed lost, his anger dissolving into exhaustion as he sank to his knees. The crystal song softened, its resonance now a balm rather than a blade. In Raiskin's mind, he felt the presence beneath the temple. Ancient, wounded, but grateful. The walls steadied, the ceiling's cracks glowed with soft light, closing by inches. The temple, though scarred, would endure. When Raiskin finally released the artifacts, the chamber was still. He staggered, supported by Rahandal, and looked around, the thieves subdued, the danger past, the crystal quiet in his palm. Yet in the silence, a single question reverberated in the depths of Raiskin's mind, uttered in a voice not entirely his own. Whose pain do you carry now? And what will you do with it? Raiskin stepped forward, his voice raw from channeling the temple's magic. Enough riddles. Tell me who sent you here, who taught you to steal the crystal and wield the rod. Was it Malachar's cult, or someone at the academy? His words cut through the hush in the chamber, drawing every eye to the masked leader. The leader hesitated, then reached up with trembling hands to remove the silver mask. Behind it was a young man, barely older than Raiskin, his face drawn but fiercely proud. "No cult," he rasped. "No academy master. Were children of the Watcher, orphans, all of us, bound by grief the academy would not heal. The crystal's song called to our pain, promised an end to memory's torment. We followed a trail of secrets left by someone who knew too much, someone who signed only with an initial R." Randall's eyes narrowed, but Raiskin pressed on. "And the ironwood rod. The ritual, who taught you that?" The leader's gaze flickered to Randall, then away. "Instructions came by courier, sealed with the Blackstaff's sigil. We thought we could use the artifacts to bargain for our own freedom, maybe even under Malachar's curse." but the pain was too much. The temple feeds on sorrow, like Malachar did. A heavy silence settled as the truth sank in. Raiskin felt the crystal's quiet pulse, as if echoing the leader's words. Shadows lingered in the corners, and the healing magic could not erase the sense that deeper games were afoot, ones with roots tangled in both the academy and the ancient wounds of the world. Raiskin's demand hung in the air, the only sound the faint humming of the crystal in his hand. Randall's face was carved from stone, but something flickered behind his eyes, a glimmer of unease or guilt, impossible to tell. The Blackstaff sigil is not so easily forged, Randall said quietly, his words weighted with meaning. Yet there are those within the Academy who have access to its seal. We have trusted too many, and perhaps some bare wounds that make them vulnerable to manipulation. Raiskin pressed further, refusing to let the silence swallow the truth. So who, Randall, who in the Academy would send orphans into the marsh with such dangerous knowledge? The Archmage's jaw tightened. There is a ledger, he admitted, sealed in my quarters, recording every use of the sigil. But this, he gestured to the leader, suggests the rot runs deeper than I feared. Someone close to the heart of the Academy wishes to see these shadows persist. The young leader, face pale but resolute, spoke again. We were told pain kept the world honest, that by carrying the crystal here, we could unmask what the Academy tried to hide. The letters always ended with, "Only those who remember can truly be free." Randall's eyes widened at the phrase, recognition dawning, and something darker fear. The temple, now airily calm, seemed to listen. Raiskin felt the crystal's song shift, its sorrow sharpening into warning. He realized the thieves were not the true danger, but messengers. Pawns in a struggle that reached all the way back to the Academy's oldest secrets. Our time was running short to uncover the mastermind before the next tragedy struck. Raiskin clutched the black crystal, closing his eyes to the faint light that bathed the ruined temple. He let his mind drift deeper into the magic's current, feeling the sorrowful resonance stretch beyond the stone walls. Seeking, searching, listening, shadows pooled at the edges of awareness, but now, instead of fear, Raiskin wove his own memories into the song, anchoring himself against the tide. A flicker, like a cold hand brushing his thoughts, answered. It was not Malachar, but something familiar. A mind masked in gray, watching from afar. Images flashed in a candlelit study, pages blurred by tears. A quill scratching the words, only those who remember. The sense of a presence hovering just beyond the veil, intent and hungry. Suddenly the crystal pulsed, and through it a voice. Thin and distant, but unmistakably real. You have chosen remembrance over oblivion. Beware the cost. Raiskin Durander. Not all wounds should be healed. The link snapped, leaving only the echo of that warning and an aftertaste of bitter regret. Raiskin staggered, breaking contact, his breath ragged. Randall stepped closer, hand on his shoulder, but even the Archmage looked shaken. The masked leader stared at Raiskin, wide-eyed. Did you see them? The one who pulls the strings. Raiskin nodded grimly, realizing that the mastermind was neither ghost nor demon, but a wounded mind hidden within the Academy's own halls. One who believed that pain was a gift, and forgetting a curse. Raiskin's voice trembled with urgency as he relayed the vision to Rondel, the candlelit study, the cryptic warning, the chilling certainty that the mastermind was one of their own. Randall's jaw set in grim determination. We cannot wait until we return to Waterdeep. The ledger must be checked now, by magical means if need be. If the mastermind is watching, we risk another disaster with every passing hour. The masked leader, still kneeling among the scattered remnants of the ritual, looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "If you find them," he whispered, "will you remember us? Will you see the wounds the Academy left behind?" Raiskin nodded solemnly, the weight of the crystal heavy in his palm. "We will. But first, we must end the cycle. No more pawns, no more forgotten names." Randall turned towards Moranal and Tavern, voice crisp. "Prepare ascending. We must contact the Academy's wardens and demand the records be opened at once. Raiskin, you and I will attempt to scry the ledger's location, and lay a magical anchor to reveal the next use of the Blackstaff's sigil." As the group gathered in a circle, the crystal song grew sharper, filling the sunken temple with a keening note that resonated in bone and memory. Raiskin sensed the mastermind's attention shift, just for a heartbeat, toward the Academy's heart, as if bracing for exposure. The final confrontation hovered just ahead, its shadow stretching long and cold in the ancient gloom. Raiskin watched as Moranal and Tavern vanished into the waterlogged archway, their silhouettes swallowed by the gloom of the marsh beyond. The temple's vaulted chamber seemed to press in as the crystal's song faded to a low, insistent thrum, like a heartbeat echoing in ancient stone. Randall stepped beside him, drawing a slender wand and murmuring a spell. Motes of blue light spiraled upward, tracing invisible threads in the air. "Focus with me," Randall said, voice taut. "I'll anchor the scrying. You must attune the crystal. Let it show you the ledger's resting place. But do not let it guide your hand alone." Raiskin nodded, feeling the magic prickle at his skin as he pressed the black crystal to his brow. Shadows and memories whirled a locked chest beneath a sigil-marked tapestry, the scent of old parchment, a hidden alcove behind the Blackstaff's desk. The vision sharpened, and Raiskin glimpsed a spectral hand, thin, trembling, reaching for the ledger even as they watched. Randall's expression darkened. "Someone is moving against us, even now. The mastermind must know we're searching. We have precious little time." The air grew colder, the temple's gloom deepening as Raiskin forced the vision to linger. He caught a flicker of a face in the reflection of a silver inpot, features twisted by grief, eyes glinting with purpose. The link snapped, leaving Raiskin reeling and the name on his tongue, so close, yet just out of reach. Outside, a distant crash echoed through the marsh, followed by a burst of magical light. Raiskin and Randall exchanged a glancing, whatever was happening. The thieves' ordeal was not yet over. The true enemy was moving, and the temple's ancient stones seemed to shudder in anticipation of what would come next. Raiskin closed his eyes and pressed the black crystal to his brow once more, letting the pain and memory of the temple flow into him like icy water. Shadows curled at the edge of his mind. First the ache of Malicher's sorrow, then the raw wound of the mastermind's presence, pulsing with bitter, longing. The vision returned, sharper and more demanding, a flickering study lined with ancient tomes, the Blackstaff's sigil glimmering on a desk awash in moonlight. The silver inpot trembled, and the spectral hand reached again. This time Raiskin willed himself closer, forcing his consciousness into the reflection's depths. He caught a glimpse of the mastermind's face, not monstrous, but heartbreakingly human. A weathered scholar, eyes rimmed red with sleeplessness, lips whispering names over and over, as if afraid silence would erase them. Behind him, the walls were covered in sheets of parchment, names, dates, stories, all meticulously cataloged. Raiskin felt the agony of memory, of being unseen, unheard, a wound that festered in the heart of the academy. The scholar turned, sensing Raiskin's intrusion, and their gazes locked. A terrible pressure built behind Raiskin's eyes. The crystal vibrated, and the voice came again. "You would expose me, but can you bear the weight? The ledger is my confession. Find it, and you'll see what the Academy chooses to forget." The vision fractured, shards of memory slicing through Raiskin's mind as he staggered, nearly dropping the crystal. Randall caught him, steadying his shoulders as sweat beaded on Raiskin's brow. Gasping, Raiskin forced out, "It's a professor, someone forgotten by the Academy. The ledger. He's left a trail. We have to find it before he destroys the evidence." The ancient stones seemed to tremble in sympathy, as if the temple itself mourned for all that had been lost. Raiskin's demand cut through the tense air. "There's no time. We need to be at the Academy now." Randall hesitated only a heartbeat, then swept his wand in a precise arc, arcane syllables crackling from his lips. The world compressed, a shadows and torchlight folding together as the teleportation spell gripped them both. They rematerialized with a jolt in the Blackstaff's study. Moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across shelves heavy with tomes. The scent of parchment and candle wax was sharp, but the room was not empty. A figure stood by the great desk, hooded, clutching a battered ledger to his chest. His face was half-lit, hollow eyes burning with desperation. Raiskin's heart hammered. The professor, once only a ghost in vision, was now real and cornered. Randall stepped forward, staff raised. "It's over. Put the ledger down. No more secrets." The man's knuckles whitened on the book. "You don't understand," he whispered hoarsely. "To forget is the greatest cruelty. I can't let them erase us again." Shadows flickered about him, drawn from both the room and the crystal in Raiskin's hand, as if memory itself fought the intrusion. Raiskin felt the crystal's song surge, resonating with the man's pain. The confrontation, long prophesied, hung by a thread. Would compassion or force decide what became of the Academy's forgotten? Raiskin steadied himself, the black crystal cool and heavy in his palm. He let its mournful resonance expand, reaching out to the professor's battered mind. Their thoughts brushed pain, loneliness, and a terrible yearning to be remembered. Memories poured through the linked classrooms, emptied by time. The professor's voice echoing unheard, students' faces blurring into forgetfulness. Each memory was a wound, and Raiskin felt them all. Shame, bitterness, a desperate hope that some trace might endure. The professor's grip on the ledger slackened, his eyes filling with tears that glimmered in the blue light. You see, he whispered, voice raw. I gathered their stories. Every exile, every lost name, the Academy erases what it fears. Malachar is only the shadow of our silence. The ledger pulsed in his hands, alive with memory, its pages flickering between hope and despair. Raiskin's mind threatened to fracture under the weight. But in that agony, he found a threading. The same sorrow that fueled Malachar's power also held the key to healing. You're not alone, Raiskin replied, voice trembling. If we remember together, if we speak their names, the pain can become something else. Not a curse, but a bond. Randall, silent but watchful, a stranger, let his staff's glow steady the moment, holding back the shadows that wreathed at the study's edge. The professor's resolve wavered. He looked to Raiskin, something pleading in his gaze. Then help me, he begged. Before the Academy's fear destroys what's left, remember with me, before they come. The crystal thrummed with possibility and peril, the fate of the forgotten teetering on the edge of a single choice. Raiskin took a trembling breath and nodded, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with the professor. Randall stood behind them, staff aglow, his presence a silent promise of protection, but also of witness. Together, Raiskin and the professor opened the battered ledger, its pages quivering as if bracing for judgment. Names spilled forth. Students exiled for forbidden love, instructors dismissed for daring to remember, apprentices who vanished with only rumors left behind. Each name was a wound, each story a plea not to be erased. As they read, the black crystal in Raiskin's hand pulsed brighter, its song harmonizing with the professor's voice. The air thickened with memory, spectral silhouettes flickering at the study's edges, half-remembered faces, echoes of laughter and weeping. The shadows did not threaten. They listened. With every name, the oppressive gloom lightened, and Raiskin felt the pain within the crystal soften, sorrow yielding to something gentler, almost reverent. The professor's shoulders shook, but he pressed on, voice gaining strength. We remember you, he intoned, and Raiskin echoed him, feeling the truth of it anchor him against the swirling darkness inside. The ledger's magic, born of desperation, began to unravel, its curse of silence replaced by the light of remembrance. At last they reached the final page. The professor looked to Raiskin, tears streaming freely now. Thank you, he whispered, for giving them this moment. But as the last name fell from their lips, a tremor ran through the study. The crystal song faltered, replaced by a distant, furious howl, the shadow of Malachar sensing its hold weakening. The true reckoning was coming, and Raiskin knew the Academy's greatest trial was only beginning. The moment Malachar's howl echoed through the chamber, the black crystal in Raiskin's hand blazed with silvery black light. He drew upon the harmony he and the professor had forged, letting remembrance flow outward as a living shield. The shadows swept in, a writhing tide of forgotten pain and hungry regret, but the crystal's song twisted, interweaving the lost voices like threads in a tapestry. Faces flickered in the gloom, not as threats, but witnesses to the struggle. Raiskin stood tall despite the pressure crushing his chest, meeting Malachar's presence with all the names and stories he'd just honored. The shadow recoiled, its form fraying at the edges, each memory spoken aloud a lash that kept it at bay. Randall raised his staff, reinforcing the shield with a quiet spell, while the professor clutched the ledger and joined his voice to Raiskin's. we remember, and we will not let you devour what remains. But Malachar was not defeated so easily. The room darkened still further, spectral chains lashing from the walls, seeking to bind both Raiskin and the professor in a loop of grief. The crystal's harmony trembled. If Raiskin faltered, the shadow would reclaim not just the forgotten, but all those bound by memory's pain. Raiskin felt the agony and hope of every name pressing on his will, demanding a choosing to hold the shield firm, reach deeper into the crystal's song, or try to strike directly at Malachar in this vulnerable moment. The fate of the Academy, and perhaps his own soul, hung in the balance as the air thickened with memory and shadow, awaiting Raiskin's next move. Raiskin closed his eyes and let the crystal's resonance pull him deeper, past the surface layer of sorrow and into a place where memory and magic intertwined. The song grew richer, weaving discordant notes of grief with the faintest threads of hope. An ancient melody, filled with longing for connection. Malachar's shadow battered at his mind, but Raiskin did not recoil. Instead, he offered the lost spirit all the names they had spoken, the stories they had honored, letting them flow through the crystal as a chorus of remembrance. The change was immediate. The chains binding the professor and Raiskin shimmered, the links straining as if confused by the new harmony. Malachar's form flickered, becoming less monstrous and more human, features emerging from the gloom, gaunt and anguished, but unmistakably a scholar's. Within the voice that had haunted Raiskin for years, he heard a question. Will you remember me too? Will you carry this pain so that I might rest? The study filled with spectral light, the faces of the forgotten now at peace, watching as Raiskin stretched his hand toward the fading shadow. We will not forget, he promised, voice ringing with the power of the crystal's new song. The chains shattered. The shadow that was Malachar howled, not in rage, but in relief, dissolving into 1,000 motes of light that drifted upward through the stone ceiling, leaving behind only a gentle hush. The professor slumped, exhausted but free of the old curse. Randall lowered his staff, awe and sorrow mingling in his eyes. Raiskin, his hands still tingling from the crystal's final note, realized something fundamental had shifted, not just in the temple, but within himself. The greatest trial of memory had been faced, but the wounds it revealed would take far longer to heal. Raiskin turned to Archmage Randall, his voice unsteady but resolute. If the Academy is to heal, we can't let these names, these wounds, be forgotten again. What must we do to break the cycle? Randall regarded him gravely, the lines of responsibility deepening on his face. Remembrance must not be passive. We must bear witness, openly, a memorial perhaps, or a living record, safeguarded by magic and tradition alike. But it will require more honesty among ourselves, and the courage to confront our own failings. The professor, still clutching the now quiet ledger, nodded weakly. If we hide our sorrow, it festers. We must let it be spoken, not just in times of crisis, but as part of our days. The Academy's power is knowledge, but its soul is memory. Raiskin felt the truth of it, even as a chill crawled up his spine. The task ahead seemed immense, but something within him, scarred though it was, burned with new purpose. As the three stood together in the aftermath, a faint tremor passed through Raiskin's hand. The black crystal was dim now, but he sensed a lingering echo, a warning that Malachar's shadow was not wholly gone. Rundle placed a hand on Raiskin's shoulder. You have changed the pattern, but your path will not be easy. There are those who will fear what you've done, and what you have become. Be ready. In the corridor outside, voices rose, his friends returning, unaware of the battle just fought. Raiskin steeled himself, realizing the scars left by Malakar's influence might soon show in ways he could not control. It was time to rejoin the others, and face the consequences of the new truth. The corridor outside the study was dim, lanterns guttering against the stone walls as Raiskin stepped through the doorway. His friends, Moranal, Tavern, and Sarah, looked up, relief flooding their faces before they caught sight of the exhaustion and haunted edge in Raiskin's eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Moranal, her voice tight, asked, "What happened in there? We heard shouting and the shadows." Raiskin recounted the battle, the harmony of remembrance, and how he and the professor had used the black crystal to free Malachar's spirit. As he spoke, his hands trembled slightly, and the words came with a rawness that unsettled the group. Sarah tried to lighten the mood with a jest, but her voice faltered under the weight of Raiskin's story. Tavern stared at him, brow furrowed, while Marinel's eyes darted between Raiskin and the still dark crystal he held. But it was when Raiskin described the moment he had reached into Malachar's sorrow, how he had felt the pain and anger, how he'd nearly lost himself to the shadow, that the tension in the hall thickened. Tavern took an involuntary step back, and even Miranel's reassuring hand faltered. None of them doubted Raiskin's intentions, but the intensity of his experience, and the way his voice chilled when recalling the shadow's power, left a rift of unease between them. A silence settled, broken only by the distant tolling of a bell. Raiskin could sense the fear and uncertainty in his friends. He realized the scars of what happened were deeper than he had thought, not just within himself, but in those who had come to trust him. The pattern was emerging, each victory left not only hope, but new wounds. How would he bridge this growing chasm? Raiskin set the black crystal on a narrow table beneath the flickering lantern. He beckoned Moranal and Tavern closer, forcing his voice steady. "I need your eyes, your honesty. What do you sense here?" Moranal hesitated, then reached out, her fingers hovering above the crystal's dull surface. Tavern, more wary, muttered a quiet abjuration under his breath, his warding amulet glowing faintly blue. At first nothing happened, but as Moranal focused her illusion magic, and the air shimmered and the crystal's interior revealed swirling shadows, memories colliding, grief barely contained. Moranal flinched, tears springing unbidden to her eyes. "There's so much pain in here," she whispered. "Not just Malachar's. Yours too, Raiskin." Tavern leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The resonance. It's changed since you attuned to it. It's not pure shadow anymore, but it's raw, too raw. If you wield it in battle, I think it could break something inside you." He shot Raiskin a worried look. "Or in us." Their reactions rippled with fear and sympathy, but also a dawning pattern. Every use of the crystal, every show of Raiskin's power, left scars on them all. Moranal squeezed Raiskin's hand, voice trembling. "Promise us you'll never use it alone. Promise you'll let us help you carry this." no matter how dark it gets. The weight of the promise hung between them, the first step toward healing, or the warning of a fracture yet to come. Raiskin nodded at Miranol's plea, his mind already racing through possible solutions. We can't rely on willpower alone. Not when the crystal's power is so unpredictable. We need to research ways to contain or neutralize it. There must be something in the Academy's archives, or old grimoires, about binding shadow-infused artifacts. Tavern hesitated, anxiety clear in his eyes. If we do this, we have to be careful. The last time someone tried to seal Malakar's sorrow, it created the crystal in the first place. We need more than just magic. We need knowledge, and help from someone who understands these scars. Miranol nodded, wiping away her tears. Let's go to the restricted library tonight. I remember Professor Nevern mentioning a treatise on magical grief and containment. If anyone can help us, it's him. And perhaps Lorelei too. She's handled the staff before. She might sense something we can't. The sense of urgency in the air was palpable. The group's unity was shaken, but not broken. As Raiskin gathered the crystal and tucked it carefully away, he caught his reflection in a darkened window, eyes shadowed, but determined. The breakthrough was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new, more dangerous path. Together, they turned toward the stairwell, ready to descend into the depths of the Academy's forbidden knowledge. The trio pressed through the silent, labyrinthine corridors of the Academy, their footsteps muffled by thick, dust-laden rugs. At the threshold of the restricted library, Miranol produced the silver ring Lorelei had gifted Raiskin. She turned it in her fingers, and the sigil glimmered, a soft pulse that coaxed a hidden alcove to slide open, revealing the forbidden stacks. The air within was chill, thick with the scent of old parchment and something sharper, the residue of dangerous magic. As they entered, Tavern's warding amulet flared a warning blue, then subsided, perhaps in deference to the ring's silent approval. Miranol found her composure, murmuring, "If there's knowledge here that can help, we'll find it together." Raiskin's hands moved instinctively to the spines of ancient grimoires, searching for the treatise Professor Nevern had mentioned. His fingers hovered over a volume bound in midnight leather, etched with a sigil of overlapping tears. He drew it out, the book heavy and cold, its title, On the Containment of Grief-Bound Magic. As Raiskin opened it, a warded glyph glimmered, and a spectral hand, nothing more than a faint outline, reached from the page toward him before dissolving. The message was clear. The book itself carried a sorrowful burden, and only those who truly understood loss could decipher its secrets. Miranol and Tavern watched anxiously as Raiskin began to read, the candlelight flickering over his tense features. The words within spoke of rituals, costs, and the danger of channeling pain into power. A choice lay ahead: to trust the wisdom of the past, or risk forging their own path. The shadows in the library seemed to lean closer, waiting for their decision. Miranol took a steadying breath and extended her hands over the midnight leather tome. Her illusion magic shimmered faintly, threads of light weaving through the air as she coaxed the hidden wards to reveal themselves. For a heartbeat, the glyphs on the cover blazed with spectral tears, then softened into patterns only visible through the lens of her magic. "It's layered," she whispered, brow furrowed. There are grief wards, meant to test the reader's memories. But there's something else, too. Not just protection, almost like a warning. The book's pages flickered with illusory images, a classroom in flames, spectral hands reaching from the darkness, a circle of mages desperately channeling sorrow. Mirinal flinched, and Tavern gripped her shoulder, steadying her. Raiskin studied the shapes, feeling a cold recognition. These were echoes of past containment attempts, failures and tragedies the book itself remembered. He realized the tome would not yield its secrets unless the reader confronted personal loss, but also learned from the pain of others. The pattern was unmistakable. Every ritual, every act of binding left scars on the object, the caster, and those nearby. Tavern's voice was tight. If we get this wrong, it could break more than just the crystal. We need to deciding, do we open the book fully and face its memories together, or search for another way? The air in the alcove was thick with the weight of choice, and the shadows seemed to pulse, as if the library itself awaited their answer. Raiskin steadied his breath and pressed his palm to the midnight leather tome, letting the chill seep into his skin. He drew on the shadow magic within, feeling its familiar ache, like an old, unhealed wound. The wards responded instantly. Spectral chains lashed out, wrapping around his forearm, dragging him into a cascade of memories not his own. Flames consumed a classroom. Desperate voices cried out as magic spiraled out of control. A circle of mages, faces twisted in grief, poured their pain into a glowing vessel. The same crystal he carried. Each vision stabbed into Raiskin's mind, forcing him to relive their sorrow. But as he endured, his own memories surged forth in the loss of Lorali, the terror of Malachar's whisper, the suspicion in his friend's eyes during the last battle. The book's words pulsed, as if testing whether he would break or become something darker. Miranal and Tavern watched, horror and awe mingling in their faces. A shadow rose behind Raiskin, his own, stretched and distorted by the magic's pain. For a moment, the boundaries blurred, and Raiskin's voice echoed with something not entirely his. Containment is never without cost. Every wound remembered, every sorrow bound leaves its mark. If we do this, the scars will be ours to bear, forever. With a final surge of will, Raiskin forced the wards to yield. The tome's pages fluttered open, revealing the lost ritual at its heart. But as the magic faded, Tavern recoiled. Fear etched in his features, as if he had glimpsed not just Raiskin, but the shadow behind him. A new pattern was emerging, one that none could ignore. Raiskin set his jaw, voice low but firm. Let me take this risk. If the scars must fall on anyone, let it be me. Mirinal's protest died on her lips as she saw the haunted determination in his eyes. Tavern's wariness hardened into a wary distance. Alone, Raiskin pored over the ritual's intricate diagrams and sorrow-laden incantations. Every page he turned seemed to echo with a phantom cry, driving home the pain that had haunted generations of mages before him. The ritual was brutal in its honesty. To bind shadow magic, a mage must not only confront their own sorrow, but bear witness to the memories of those lost to the darkness. Raiskin's mind reeled as the book forced him to relive his own violent moments. Spells unleashed with too much fury, enemies struck down in blind desperation. Flickers of battle replaying cultists reduced to ash, the sickening ease with which he'd wielded the black crystal's power. His hands trembled as he realized how closely his actions mirrored the very tragedies the ritual warned against. Outside the alcove, Miranil and Tavern exchanged a worried glance. Tavern whispered, "He's not just studying, he's wrestling with something inside. Did you see his eyes during the last fight? There was no mercy." Miranil nodded, clutching her focus stone. "It's not just the magic, it's changing him. I'm afraid for him, Tavern, and for us." A pattern was emerging the more Raiskin sought to shield his friends, the deeper into isolation and violence he sank. As he copied the ritual's final lines, a single tear traced his cheek. The cost of seeking answers was becoming terrifyingly clear. Raiskin tucked the ritual notes deep into his satchel, the leather-bound pages bound in silence by a cantrip no one else would break. He forced his face into calm as he emerged from the alcove, but Tavern's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening his features. Miranil tried to meet Raiskin's gaze, but he looked away, feigning a study of the ancient shelves and their dust-laden tomes. They continued through the lantern-lit corridors of the library, the air thick with unspoken tension. Tavern kept his distance, his hand on his warding amulet, while Miranil's steps faltered, her illusions flickering in and out. The trio was together in body, but Raiskin could feel the rift growing, his need to protect them fueling the very isolation that now set him apart. A sudden crash echoed from the far end of the hall. Shouts, then the unmistakable crackle of defensive magic. Instinct overtook caution. Raiskin raced toward the sound, his mind already bracing for violence. Miranil called after him, her voice tinged with fear, but Raiskin barely heard her. As he rounded the corner, the terror in his companions' eyes during their last battle flashed unbidden in his mind. Was he running to save them, or to unleash the power he could no longer restrain? In the flickering torchlight ahead, shadows danced around a group of terrified students beset by a spectral assailant. Raiskin's fists clenched, shadow magic rising unbidden, the edge of violence closer now than ever. The cost of his isolation and his power was about to be paid. The specter lunged at the cowering students, its form a shifting mass of sorrow and rage, eyes hollow save for a glint of cold malice. Raiskin did not hesitate. He thrust his hand forward, shadow magic boiling from his fingertips, striking the specter with a torrent of inky force. The very walls of the corridor seemed to ripple with the backlash, lanterns flaring and guttering as the shadows deepened. For a heartbeat, the specter shrieked, not in pain but in recognition, as if it glimpsed something kindred in Raiskin's unleashed fury. Tendrils of shadow lashed outward, threatening to engulf the terrified onlookers, but Raiskin's will bent it all toward destruction. With a final, violent surge, he shattered the specter into a burst of black motes. The corridor fell silent, save for the panicked breathing of the rescued students. Miranil and Tavern arrived just in time to witness the display. Miranil's face blanched, her illusions flickering as if struggling to mask her horror. Tavern stared, wide-eyed, his grip unconsciously tightening on his wand. The students Raiskin had saved scurried away, unable to meet his gaze, one even muttering a prayer as they fled. Only then did Raiskin realize what he'd become in their eyes, not a hero, but something frightening, almost monstrous. The sense of isolation deepened, a chasm opening between him and his companions. The pattern was undeniable now. Each act of protection only drove those he cared about further away. Raiskin slipped away from the stunned crowd, his footsteps echoing hollowly down the empty corridor. He pressed his back against a cold stone arch, the taste of shadow magic still bitter on his tongue. His hands shook as he stared at them, hands that had just unleashed a violence he could no longer pretend was righteous. The silence closed around him, thick and suffocating, broken only by the ragged edge of his breath. He tried to reason with himself. He had saved those students, driven off a spirit that would have devoured them. But the memory of the specter's recognition, its kinship with the darkness he'd wielded, gnawed at his resolve. What was he becoming? The rituals, the secrecy, the isolation each step meant to protect his friends now felt like another brick in his own prison. Distantly he heard Moranal and Tavern's voices, worried, urgent, searching for him. He didn't answer. Instead, he found a shadowed alcove, sliding down until he sat huddled in the dark, clutching his knees. The ache of loneliness was sharper than any wound. He wanted to reach for his friends, to explain, to ask for help, but the shame was too great. He feared their judgment more than the shadow's pull. As he sat in the gloom, the echo of Malachar's sorrow whispered at the edge of his mind. Raiskin realized that every act of violence, every spell cast in anger, had marked him, and the pattern was repeating, just as it had for the spirit that haunted him. The solution, if there was one, would demand more than strength. It would demand honesty and trust, the very things he'd been pushing away. Raiskin pressed the clan-focused stone to his forehead, its smooth surface cool against his fevered skin. He drew a shaky breath and closed his eyes, searching inward through the swirling fog of shame and fear. Darkness pressed in, thick with echoes. Malakar's hollow sorrow, the cries of the specter, the horrified silence of his friends. But within that darkness, a single spark of memory glimmered, Nithal's voice, calm and resolute, teaching him to anchor himself with truth rather than denial. He let the memories come, painful and raw. Glorali's promise, Miranal's gentle touch, Tavern's wary trust. Each recollection shimmered with both joy and loss, and Raiskin understood. Shadow magic was not only power, but the weight of all he refused to share. The focused stone warmed in his palm, pulsing with an ancient resonance, not a tool of suppression, but a bridging an invitation to bring his grief and fears into the light. A vision stirred behind his eyelids, a circle of friends, hands joined, their magic holding back the darkness not because it was flawless, but because it was honest. Raiskin saw himself, not as a monster, but as someone who could choose to isolate and destroy, or to trust and heal. The pain would not vanish, but it might be shared. When his eyes opened, tears blurred the torchlight. The decision settled in his chest, heavy but somehow freeing. If he was to conquer the shadow, he could not do it alone. The time had come to seek his friends, not to protect them from the truth, but to finally share it. Raiskin found Moranal and Tavern in a quiet courtyard, the moonlight silvering the flagstones and casting long shadows across the hedges. Both looked up at his approach. Mirinal's face drawn with worry, Tavern's expression still edged with fear. Raiskin hesitated, but the memory of the focused stone's warmth gave him the courage to speak. He began haltingly, voice barely above a whisper, recounting the truth, how Malachar's presence had never truly left him, how every use of shadow magic tore at his soul, and how the violence in the corridor was not an act of heroism, but a slip toward something darker. He spoke of the sorrow that shadow magic fed upon, of the isolation he'd built around himself, and the terror of becoming what he fought. Miranal listened with shining eyes, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Tavern's fear shifted to something more complicated: relief, confusion, and a fierce protectiveness. When Raiskin finished, the courtyard was silent but for the distant hoot of an owl. Miranal reached out, taking his hand, and Tavern stepped closer, his jaw set with new resolve. "You should have told us sooner," Tavern said, voice rough. "But you're not alone. Not now. Not ever." The weight in Raiskin's chest eased, replaced by something fragile and bright. For the first time in weeks, he did not feel like a monster. As the three stood together, hands clasped, it was clear that the pattern could be broken. Whatever darkness waited, they would face it as one. The three made their way through the lantern-lit corridors of Blackstaff Academy, the hush of late evening settling over the ancient stones. Their footsteps led them first to Professor Nevron's study, where the old conjurer sat surrounded by stacks of grimaires and the flicker of magical wards. He looked up, his spectacles catching the candlelight, and motioned them in with a gentle urgency. Raiskin wasted little time. "Professor, I've told them everything. About Malachar, the shadow magic, even the violence it draws out of me. We need to know how to stop becoming what we fight." Nevron studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You've taken the first and hardest step. But there is another case, one the Academy never resolved. Lord Viren's son, years past, was touched by the shadow and twisted into something monstrous when he tried to fight it alone. His fate was buried, but the wounds linger still. If you want answers, you must find what became of him. His story may hold the key to your own struggle." He slid a sealed parchment across the desk. "This will grant you access to the old East Wing where the records, and perhaps more, await. But be warned, in truth there comes at a price. Go with trust, not pride, and if you doubt, seek Nithal. He knows what it is to walk the edge of shadow and return." The halls of the East Wing were colder than Raiskin remembered. Each stone archway cloaked in a thin haze that swallowed the echoes of their footsteps. Miranal clung to his arm, her fingers trembling slightly, while Tavern held the lantern high, its light flickering against doors sealed by ancient sigils. The air grew thick with the scent of dust and old magic as they approached a heavy oak door marked with the Viren crest. A falcon poised above a broken chain. Raiskin pressed Nevron's writ to the seal. With a faint shudder, the sigils unwound, and the door creaked open on silent hinges. Inside, the chamber was lined with shelves of yellowed records, faded portraits, and, at its center, a glass case containing a single, tattered cloak stained dark at the hem. The plaque beneath read, "Here of Viren, fate unknown." Miranal's breath caught. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. The air inside shimmered with suppressed shadow, an unease that seemed to press against their minds. Raiskin stepped forward, feeling an uncanny resonance, not unlike the presence of Malachar, a sorrowful, restless hunger lurking just out of sight. Tavern scanned the shelves, pulling a battered journal free. The cover was scorched, but the Viren's sigil remained. This could be his, Tavern murmured. Raiskin nodded grimly. We have to read it. Together. Whatever turned him, it started here, and it may be the only way to learn how not to share his fate. Raiskin moved to the far wall, where the shadows clung thickest beneath a row of forgotten portraits. As he pressed along the stonework, his fingers traced a subtle groove, a concealed seam. Moranal, watching intently, whispered a minor illusion of flickering candlelight to reveal any hidden runes. Tavern, ever cautious, swept the floor for pressure plates or magical glyphs. Together they uncovered a small iron latch camouflaged by dust and age. With a slow breath, Raiskin lifted the latch. The panel creaked open, revealing a shallow recess behind the wall. Inside lay a bundle of letters bound with a black silk ribbon, a silver signet ring bearing the Varen crest, and a slim, rune-etched dagger stained dark at the tip. Moranal gingerly picked up the letters, her eyes widening as she glanced at the topmost paging. The writing was frantic, filled with pleas for help and confessions of dreams haunted by whispering shadows. He was reaching out to someone, Moranal murmured, voice trembling. But these were never sent. It's as if he was trapped, even before he vanished. Tavern examined the dagger, noting a faint, lingering aura of shadow magic. Its enchantment felt active, as if waiting to be awakened. Raiskin felt the resonance intensify, a distant echo of pain and fear. The Here's last days had been desperate ones, and the clues here pointed to a transformation wrought by both magical and emotional isolation. As the group exchanged uneasy glances, Raiskin realizing the Here's descent began with secrets and solitude, but perhaps with these artifacts and their unity, they could find a different ending for themselves. Raiskin gripped the rune-etched dagger, its cold weight sending a shudder through his palm. As he focused, the blade's shadowy aura flared, and the chill deepened. His vision tunneling inward, senses drowning in sorrow and terror not his own. Darkness swirled, shapes forming a young man. The Viren here, pacing a barren chamber, clutching the same dagger as whispers slithered from the walls. He scrawled frantic letters by candlelight, tears streaking his cheeks, his voice hoarse as he pleaded for someone, anyone, to answer. Pain lanced through Raiskin's mind. He saw the Here's final night, the youth standing before a mirror, eyes ringed with exhaustion, haunted by shadows coiling from his own reflection. He dragged the dagger across his palm, blood mingling with black mist, and tried to cast a warding spell. Instead, the shadows latched onto his wound, sinking into his veins. The Here screamed, a sound of despair and defiance, as his body twisted, features blurring, and the darkness consumed what remained of his humanity. Moranal's hand tightened on Raiskin's arm, her voice distant but urgent. "Come back, Raiskin." Tavern pressed the clarity token to Raiskin's brow, anchoring him. With effort, Raiskin tore free from the vision, gasping for breath. The echo of the Here's pain lingered, a warning as much as a plague. Isolation and secrecy had been his undoing. Raiskin realized that to resist the same fate, he must do what the Here could not. Trust his friends fully, and let them share the burden of shadow. He looked up, meeting Moranal and Tavern's worried eyes. We know what happened, but maybe together we can undo it. The artifacts thrummed, as if awaiting the next step. A choice that would shape not just Raiskin's path, but the Academy's future. Raiskin leaned closer to the glass case, his reflection wavering in the faint magical light. The cloak within was once fine, deep blue velvet, now faded and heavy with the residue of shadow. As he pressed his palm to the glass, a ripple of cold radiated outward, revealing thin lines of runes stitched along the hem, wards against intrusion, hastily reinforced by a desperate hand. Miranel murmured an allusion to clarify the script, and Tavern shielded the lantern to keep the light from flaring too brightly. The runes told a story of fear and isolation, hastily scribed protections, desperate attempts to seal out the darkness. A ward after ward laid atop each other until the very fabric of the cloak shuddered under the strain. Raiskin sensed a feedback, an echo that suggested the wards had turned inward, trapping not just shadow, but the Hire's own pain inside. The case itself radiated a binding spell, keyed to prevent the cloak from being moved or destroyed. Miranel, voice soft, asked, should we break the case and try to cleanse the cloak? Or would that release something worse? Tavern's hand hovered protectively over the clarity token, ready should Raiskin falter. The weight of the Here's sorrow pressed in, but Raiskin realized that if they could unravel the wards together, sharing memory and grief, they might not only purify the relic, but learn the ritual needed prevent another such transformation. With the artifacts before them and unity in their hearts, the group stood at a threshold. The next act, whether to confront the magic here, bring the relics to Nevron for study, or search deeper for answers, would shape the fate of all touched by shadow at Blackstaff. Raiskin nodded to Moranal and Tavern, drawing a shallow breath as he reached for the glass case. Together, they spoke the incantation, Moranal weaving gentle allusions of hope and remembrance, Tavern adding a cadence of protection and clarity, and Raiskin channeling his own sorrow into words of release. The runes along the cloak began to shimmer and writhe, the air thickening as the binding spell fought back. A pulse of shadow magic erupted from the case, the room plunging into unnatural cold. For a split second, they all glimpsed the Varanhere's form, distorted but unmistakably human, clutching his head in agony. His figure flickered with grief and longing, not malice. Miranel's voice broke through the icy gloom. You are not forgotten. We see you. We will carry your story. Raiskin pressed his palm to the glass. The runes on the cloak twisted, then unraveled, dissolving into pale motes of light. The shadowy presence within the relic surged one last time, but instead of lashing out, it coalesced into a sigh. A single, sorrowful whisper echoing in the chamber, "Thank you." The darkness receded, leaving the cloak's velvet faded but cleansed, and the chill in the air replaced by a still, mournful peace. And Tavern let out a shaky laugh, his relief palpable. We did it. We freed him, at least what was left. Raiskin felt the resonance between them deepen, not just a victory over shadow, but a revelation. To break the cycle they must remember, and let others share the burden. The next step was clearer. Bring the purified cloak and the Here's story to Professor Nevron, and begin crafting a ritual that would protect all who walked the halls of Blackstaff. The trek back to Professor Nevern's study was silent, gravity hanging between Raiskin, Moranal, and Tavern. The purified cloak lay bundled in Raiskin's arms, its weight more emotional than physical, while Tavern carefully carried the packet of unsent letters. The halls of Blackstaff Academy felt quieter than usual, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Inside Nevern's study, the lamplight flickered over shelves crowded with arcane objects and tomes. The professor looked up from his desk, eyes widening as he saw what they carried. "You did it," he murmured, rising to inspect the cloak. As Miranel recounted the ritual and Tavern placed the letters before him, Nevern's expression shifted from curiosity to sorrowful understanding. He tried. Gods, he tried to save himself, but grief and shadow twisted his wards into a prison. By unbinding them together, you've shown us a way forward. With steady hands, Nevern drew out a fresh scroll and began sketching new sigils. If memory is the wound and unity the balm, then our rituals must change. Not to erase pain, but to share and honor it. I will study the here's magic, but I need your insights as witnesses. Together, we'll forge a right to shield others from the same fate, and perhaps even heal some of Blackstaff's oldest scars. A sense of purpose settled over the trio. As Nevern prepared the first draft of the new ritual, he asked, "Will you speak to the assembly? If the academy is to change, it must hear the truth from those who faced the shadow and prevailed." The next afternoon, the great hall of Blackstaff Academy filled with a buzz of anxious anticipation. Professors lined the days, students crowded the benches, and the banners of the academy hung heavy above. Raiskin stood at the center, Moranal and Tavern at his side, the here's cleansed cloak draped over his arm, and the stack of unsent letters solemn in Tavern's hands. Professor Nevern's voice carried across the hall as he introduced things. These students have confronted the truth we long ignored, a truth of sorrow, of memory, and of unity. As all eyes turned to Raiskin, he felt the clarity token warm in his pocket, grounding him as he began to speak. He recounted the Varanhere's struggle, a lonely fight against shadow, the desperate wards, the pain of being unseen and unheard. He described how, together, they unraveled not just the magic, but the silence that had trapped the Here's spirit for decades. Miranel's illusions flickered gently above the crowd, showing scenes of hope. Students supporting one another, friends refusing to let sorrow become isolation. Tavern spoke plainly about fear, forgiveness, and what it meant to choose compassion over suspicion. As Raiskin finished, the great hall was silent, the weight of the story settling over all present. Professor Nevern stepped forward, voice steady. "Let us learn from this, not to hide our pain, but to share it. We will build a new right, so Blackstaff shadows may finally give way to honest remembrance." The assembly's first hesitant applause grew into a wave, and for the first time, Raiskin sensed the academy itself shifting, one step closer to healing. Raiskin found Lirali waiting in the shadowed alcove behind the observatory, her silver hair catching the last rays of afternoon light. The hush of the academy grounds gave them a rare moment of privacy. As he approached, she slipped the silver ring from her finger and pressed it into his palm, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard what you said to the assembly. I felt it through the bond. You haven't lost yourself, Raiskin. Not to the shadows, not yet." He told her everything, the Varanhere's tortured fate, the new ritual, and the hope that the Academy might finally begin to heal. Lorali's eyes shimmered with equal parts pride and sorrow. "My father still forbids me from joining your circle," she confessed, "but I am done letting fear dictate my path. If Blackstaff is to change, it needs us both." They stood in silence, side by side, looking out over the spires and banners of the Academy. Raiskin felt the weight of his struggle lessen, if only slightly, in her presence. "We'll face it together," he promised, voice steady. "Whatever darkness comes, we fight it with memory, and with each other." From the main hall, a bell sounded, summoning all senior students and faculty to a council. Lorelei squeezed his hand, determination hardening her expression. "Come with me. If the Academy is ready to listen, let's make sure it hears every truth that needs telling." The council chamber was filled with a quiet tension as Raiskin and Lorelei entered together. The high arched windows cast golden sunlight onto a semicircle of professors and senior students, their faces wary but expectant. Professor Nevern stood at the center, the Varanheer's cloak draped across his arms, while Archmage Randall watched from his carved seat, fingers steepled in thought. As Raiskin took his place at the front, Lorelei by his side, the whispers faded. He spoke first, not as an accuser, but as a witness. "The legacy of shadow magic is not simply a tale of monsters or mistakes. It is the wound of loneliness, of pain hidden and left to fester. We saw it in the Varanheer, who was lost not by malice, but by silence." Lorelia's voice followed, clear and unwavering. "If we want to end the cycle, we must do more than bind or banish. We must change how we remember, how we support one another. The rituals we propose will not erase sorrow, but make it a bond, not a burden. Will you join us in reforging Blackstaff's traditions?" A hush settled. All eyes turned to the Archmage, who finally rose. "Let the council speak their truths. Then, let us decide together what shape our future will take." The chamber bristled with possibilities, some faces hopeful, others fearful. The next words spoken could transform not only the Academy's approach to shadow magic, but its very soul. Raiskin's words echoed in the council chamber, each syllable weighted with the memory of what had come before. "Let us decide, openly and together," he finished, gesturing to the Varanheer's cloak and the stack of unsent letters, a testament to what silence had cost. "Will we bind sorrow in secrecy, or transform it into a bond that heals?" Archmage Randall inclined his head, eyes shining with pride and uncertainty. Professor Nevern stepped forward, his voice ringing cleared. "I second the motion. Let this council vote not just on a ritual, but on the soul of Blackstaff Academy itself. All who support the right of remembrance, stand." One by one, professors and students rose. Some were hesitant, faces shadowed by doubt, others stood with fierce conviction. The tide grew. Mirinal's hand slipped into Raiskin's, Tavern squeezed his shoulder, and Lorelia met his gaze, unwavering. There were dissenters, but they were few, the chamber filled with a quiet, resolute unity. Archmage Randall pronounced, "It is decided. The ritual of remembrance will become our new tradition. Let the wounds of the past be spoken, so that none are ever lost to shadow again." Raiskin felt a ripple of magic in the air, hope at last woven into the very stones beneath their feet. Raiskin and Lorale slipped through a quiet side corridor, the bustle of the council receding behind them. They found themselves beneath an ancient stained glass window, colored light painting fractured patterns across the flagstones. For a while, neither spoke. The air was thick with everything unspoken relief, exhaustion, hope, and the shadow of all they had endured. Lorale was the first to break the silence. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Not alone, but together. No more secrets, at least, not the kind that fester. Does it feel real to you?" Raiskin shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. "Not yet. Maybe it will when we see the next student welcomed instead of shunned. When new rituals are spoken aloud, not hidden away." She slipped her arm through his, leaning her head on his shoulder. "What do we do now, Raiskin? The academy has changed, but the world outside hasn't. We're still marked by shadow, even if we've learned how to hold it." Raiskin looked out the window, watching the sun sink behind the western towers. "We make sure the change endures. We teach, we remember, and when the darkness comes again, we face it together, not as monsters or saviors, but as people who refuse to forget."